We're talking about motivation now. And motivation is seen as the silver bullet in many ways to get to excellence in organizations, in groups, in individuals, etc. So we want to unpack this a little bit more. And again, as we did with leadership, we're looking at some of the thoughts and theories that have been developed before to explain this. And of course, it's a complex phenomenon, and there are therefore many different kind of approaches. Let's define motivation in a perfunctory way. The processes that account for an individual's intensity, direction, and persistence of effort toward attaining an organizational goal. There are three key elements. One is intensity, how hard a person tries, the effort it puts in. The direction, the effort that is channeled toward and consistent with, for example, organizational goals. And the persistence, how long a person can maintain that effort. All of these are elements of motivation. And motivation, it's important to understand, does not equal performance. It's just willingness to engage in a certain activity. How do we then make sense of that and explain it? Here's an overview of just a sample of theories. It's so critical to management that we have a whole set of them. And we're going to walk through them step by step and explain them at a cursory level, just so that you know that they exist and that many people have thought about this in different ways. The early theories here, the classical Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory, I need to sort of clarify a little bit where and how that was misunderstood. McGregor's theory X and theory Y, McClelland's theory of needs, those we're going to talk about first. And then we're going to go into more contemporary types of theories: goal-setting theory, self-determination theory, self-efficacy theory, equity theory, expectancy theory, and then my favorite, the 4-drive theory that we've touched upon already before. Here is one of the most famous theories that you probably have potentially heard about in different other contexts, and it's considered to be a pyramid of needs, a hierarchy of needs, that each need is substantially satisfied, the next becomes dominant. And you have physiological needs, safety needs, social needs, esteem, self-esteem needs, and then self-actualization kind of needs. And the assumption in this model here oftentimes is said to be that individuals cannot move to the next level until needs at the current or lower level are fully satisfied. That would mean that somebody cannot be interested in being socially accepted and having trusting relationships until they feel safe physiologically and otherwise. They cannot move towards self-actualization and self-esteem if they don't have the social support, etc., etc. Now, I think it is very important to note that while this theory is very popular and this pyramid and this hierarchy of needs is oftentimes thrown around as a valid theory, this is not the idea that Maslow actually proposed. It is not. So let me be very clear. It is not Maslow's ideas. It is a phenomenon that this is getting popularized around this idea of a hierarchy, but it does not hold up in empirical studies. And even in Maslow's theorizing, it is much more like a parallel set of needs, much similar to the 4-drive theory that I shared with you before. So according to Maslow, it is possible to be concerned and motivated by self-actualization and social needs, even though maybe physical and other needs aren't completely maximized and fulfilled yet. Another theory that has become quite important and influential is McGregor's theory X and theory Y. And basically he separates people into 2 types of people. Theory X, basically negative, and theory Y, basically positive. There are two distinct views of human beings underlying, and managers use a set of assumptions based on this view. The assumptions mold their behavior toward employees. So, for example, theory X, workers are seen to have little ambition, don't like work, avoid responsibility, they shirk. Theory Y says workers are self-directed, they enjoy work and accept responsibility. I was just talking with our producer here, Jeff, who said his way of understanding whether a company is well run or not is how people behave towards their superiors. In his experience, he has seen that people in a company, when their boss shows up, and then they all try to be busy because they get fired otherwise, are seemingly working in a theory X type of environment. Workers are assumed to have little ambition, so they need to show that they are working. They are assumed to dislike work, so they need to prove it when the boss comes. Everybody has to do something. They are assumed to avoid responsibility, so they need to disprove that. In fact, Jeff was saying that in one company that I was working at, they got actually fired when they were seen not working, quote unquote. Theory Y is quite the opposite. It's people saying, all right, you are actually working, you like it, you enjoy work, you accept responsibility, you enjoy it. So in Jeff's terms, it was more like when a boss shows up, people will stop working and they will gladly chat with the superior and in exchange information in a way. Then once the superior gets out, they go back to their work. So clearly within that context, a theory Y context, people behave differently. They're motivated differently. Superiors behave differently. Another theory that's become influential is McClelland's needs theory. He says and claims there is a need, three distinct needs that people have. One is the need for power. They need to make others behave in a way that they would not have behaved otherwise. There's a need for achievement, the drive to excel, to achieve in relation to a set of standards, to strive to succeed. And a need for affiliation, the desire for friendly and close interpersonal relationships. The assumption is that people have varying levels of each of these three needs, and it's hard to measure, but that in the context of organizations, you would need to address them all. There are certain performance predictions that go in hand with that kind of needs theory. Managerial success is determined by those people that have a high level need for power and a low need for affiliation. Versus the opposite would be true for those that want to affiliate. People with a high need for achievement prefer activities where they actually do have a chance of succeeding. The high degree of personal responsibility, feedback, and a moderate level of risk. This may be true. We find some evidence in research here, but it's not necessarily very practical, because think about how you would actually assess somebody's need for power, need for affiliation, or need for achievement. So more modern theories have developed, and some of them we'll explore in a little bit more detail. Goal-setting theory is one. Self-determination theory, another. Self-efficacy theory, a third. Equity theory, expectancy theory, and then the four-drive theory. Goal-setting theory has become very, very important, and especially in the 80s and 90s. It is a management by objectives, basically. The underlying theoretical framework is that goals and setting goals, assigning goals, influences people. People have a belief about being able to perform the task. People have an increasing commitment to these goals, and therefore their performance improves. When the goals are clear and it's understood what type and level of performance is expected. So specific and difficult goals with self-generated feedback lead to higher performance. Difficult goals. This is counterintuitive in many ways. You would think that easy goals are more motivational, possibly. You can achieve it more easily. In fact, what this theory is suggesting that it's quite the opposite. Stretch goals, difficult goals, are much more motivating than other kinds of goals. For example, when John F. Kennedy said, we're going to put a man on the moon and bring him back safely, nobody knew how to do that, but that somehow gets credit as a goal setting that allowed to motivate an entire nation to put its efforts towards that goal. Similarly, in war and in other kind of contexts, you see that it's actually the hard goals, the difficult goals, that motivate because they can bring focus and direct attention. They energize people to work harder, and the difficulty increases persistence. It forces people to be more effective and more efficient. There's a relationship between goals and performance, and they depend on a goal commitment. The more public, the better. So when Kennedy said that, it was a very public commitment, and nobody in 61 knew that in 69 this was going to happen. There's a task characteristics that are simple and well learned. And there's a culture, of course, which supports goal setting. And North America is well known for having a goal-oriented culture. You can see there is a connection between the difficulty of the goal and the task performance level, and the high goal commitment ideally is sort of what gets to higher levels of performance. This theory has been very influential, and you can see in many corporate contexts that is what underlies many of the motivational efforts. In particular, setting goals that are considered SMART goals is what you encounter quite a bit. Those are specific, measurable goals that are achievable but challenging, reinforcing, meaning relevant and rewarding, and have a clear time deadline. They're short-term, not just long-term somewhere out there, but they're measurable and you can be held accountable. So they need to be reviewed, and many people sort of do set them for themselves as well, and that is coming out of this goal-setting theory, the understanding of motivation as basically setting goals. Management by objectives is one of the most famous operational principles that comes out of this theory, and this means basically that we're setting specific goals, we're creating a participative decision-making mechanism, we have an explicit time period, and we have performance feedback. And you see that a lot in project-based work. Self-determination theory has become also increasingly influential because if you recall, the malaise and the epidemic of low employee engagement requires managers to understand why is that so? What is happening? Why are people feeling like they don't want to be engaged? They don't want to work. They're not motivated. In self-determination theory, the understanding is that people prefer to feel to have control over their actions. Anything that makes a previously enjoyed task feel more like an obligation than a freely chosen activity will undermine such motivation. So if your boss tells you to do certain things, just by the fact that it was the boss telling you is making it less likely for you to be engaged and motivated. There are implications for that work that are quite relevant. In most contexts, we use extrinsic rewards, meaning if you achieve X, you will get such bonus. If you do that, you will get this. And we find that that undermines what we call intrinsic motivation. People don't respond well to this extrinsic goal setting necessarily. They actually feel much more like dogs, Pavlov's dogs, that really just basically operate based on a reward. And it is for many people seen as demeaning, and they oftentimes then just stop being motivated. However, verbal rewards increase intrinsic motivations, messages of support, suggesting that what you're doing is excellent, for example, is shown to increase and reinforce intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is understood as the kind of motivation that authentically comes from you, within you, and that is something that you authentically want to do, no matter where you are. This means that intrinsic and extrinsic rewards are not independent. And you can see that self-determination theory is actually explaining a phenomenon that is not explained and comes out, that is under explained and neglected in goal-setting theory. There are three pieces to self-determination theory and intrinsic motivation: autonomy, mastery, purpose, and sense of connection with others. Did I say three? We can say four factors, even though some of them go together. Autonomy is the freedom of choice, as I was talking about. You want to be able to make that choice. Self-determination. Mastery is your ambition to just become better at something. Purpose is related to that you want to work in a space or in work in a profession that matters to you. And you want to have a sense of connection with other people. Another more modern theory that tries to explain, well, despite all the goals and despite all these more generic theories, we're still not very good at motivating people, is self-efficacy theory. And that is based, again, on the individual, and specifically on the belief that he or she is capable of performing a task. Higher efficacy is related to greater confidence and greater persistence in the face of difficulties. Higher efficacy is also related to a better response to negative feedback, so you work harder. Self-efficacy complements goal-setting theory in a way and says, okay, if there is a certain goal, a harder goal, and you believe in yourself that you can achieve it, then it's much more likely that you're going to get to this higher level of performance. If you don't believe it, if you think that goal is out of reach, you will actually not put up much more efforts or motivation. You will actually be demotivated. So there is something that is called too much of a hard goal, and people will just stop performing because they have low self-efficacy. They don't believe that they can make it. Equity theory is another perspective on more of a social phenomenon of motivation. It's not located in the individual like self-efficacy and self-determination theory, but it's actually that fact that people compare themselves with others and that they compare themselves with relevant others. So if I'm working in a crew and everybody has the same job and I see John is not putting the same effort in, then maybe I will also sort of pull down my effort. Or if I see other people stepping it up, I will step up myself. So there is a social nature to motivation. And these kind of comparisons do have effects on how much I am motivated. When the ratios of self-outcome and input are the same to somebody else's outcome and input, then it typically the motivation level stays the same. But when the ratios are unequal, tensions exist due to what we can consider unfairness. And an under-rewarded state causes anger, an over-rewarded state causes guilt. These tensions motivate people to adjust it and get into a situation of equity. This is why it's called equity theory. What does that look like? Well, if employees' behaviors change to create equity, they slack off, for example, if others slack off. They ask for a raise if they feel that they are performing and outperforming others and they have not been significantly significantly been compensated. They change perceptions of self, they change perceptions of others, they tell stories about them, they choose a different referent person, or they quit the job. In that theory, we understand, and you can see that in current conversations, that there are important shifts in terms of who is the referent. If men compare themselves to men and women prefer themselves to women, compare themselves to women, then we have that as a referent group. Increasingly, you don't have these same-sex comparisons anymore. You have cross-gender comparisons. Employees with long tenure rely more heavily on coworkers for comparisons. Upper-level employees make more other outside comparisons. So because there are so few people in higher level positions, they compare themselves to other employees or other leaders in other organizations. Those with higher amounts of education tend to have better information about other organizations. They compare themselves with others with the same level of education, and therefore their reference are also shifting. That has impact on their motivation. So says the theory. Expectancy theory is a specific kind of theory that explains situational type of motivation. Motivation, therefore, is a function of three different types of beliefs people have about one, their expectancy, the belief that one's efforts will affect performance, the instrumentality, the belief that one's performance will be rewarded or punished, and valence, the perceived value of the expected rewards or punishments. This is more naturally a model of extrinsic motivation, but can be adapted to extrinsic motivation if the outcomes match one's values. So for example, in the case of a salesperson, the reward of maybe hitting a sales bonus when they sell a certain amount, is that a reward that they would want? Is that reward having valence? That's at the very end here. Will meeting the stated performance requirement result in expected outcomes? So will it matter that I work a lot to get a certain number of contracts that would allow me to get a bonus? Will that work or not if my activity and my time will not result in higher level leads? Then I will not necessarily put the efforts in. The individual effort, the expectancy of performance success is the question. If I put the effort in, will it fulfill the given performance requirements? In that sense, oftentimes in the context of sales, you can adjust all three of these pieces and see where and how this has impacts on the motivation of people. There are a number of other theories, such as regulatory focus theory, and it's maybe just about an attitude. Are you in it to win, or do you play not to lose? One is considered a promotion focus, where you want to approach success. One is a prevention focus, where the goal is to avoid failure. So in this context, people are considered like theory X and Y, different in the way that they sort of engage in work. My final model here is going back to this 4-drive model, and as we've established before, this would be a model that allows people to balance the 4 drives that they have: the drive to acquire, the drive to defend, the drive to bond, and the drive to comprehend. And ideally, people are motivated to achieve a balance of those 4 drives. That's when they flourish, then that's when they perform best. This was an overview of the very many different theories of motivation. I didn't even touch on all of them, but it gives you a taste and a flavor of how complex this field is and how important it is to scholars and practitioners to understand how we can adjust, impact, and promote motivation.